Welcome back to ABC24 This Week. I'm with Otis Sanford, Susan Adler-Thorpe, and Deidre Malone talking about developments of this week, including the mayor's race, which we talk about a lot, even though it's only January. The election's not for another 10 months. It's getting more interesting, and I'd say a lot more interesting this week because former mayor, who's had multiple terms as mayor of Memphis, but that was before there were term limits, Willie Herenton, will be 83 if he wins the mayor's race, getting into it, saying that the city is craving some leadership, and he's got a proven track record of being just that. And we were talking before the show here, you all seem to think he's got a decent chance. Let's start with you, Deidre.
I do, absolutely. If you think about the last mayor's race, when he was in the race with Mayor Strickland, he came in second. And didn't really campaign.
Didn't really try.
Didn't really. So just think if he puts an effort in with the list of candidates that we have now and work just a little bit.
He's a name, no doubt about it, Susan.
Well, he got, at that time, he got almost 28% of the vote without much effort at all. So you've got to figure there's at least 22% of this community that votes, that has always voted for Willie Herenton, will always vote for Willie Herenton. And I've said before, if the field of candidates stays the same in the election for tomorrow, he very well could win, but it won't be the same. I think what Herenton's entrance into the race does, he crowds out those that really don't have much money or haven't raised a lot of money, and it'll winnow down to probably four significant candidates and maybe a few hangers-on.
Yeah.
Otis?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think
you wrote the book on Willie, actually.
I did. Actually, he's probably a godsend for me, so now I can sell some more books.
Some more chapters.
Right, put some more chapters in there. I do think he's going to be trouble for a lot of people. Yeah. He's probably going to be trouble to Floyd Bonner. He's probably going to be trouble to Van Turner.
Right.
I don't know about Paul Young, but I think he is going to be trouble. You know, I said a few weeks ago when we had the special election with Justin Pearson and Julian Bolton. Are we ready to look at younger leadership, or are we ready, or are we content to look at the tried and true, experienced, long-term leaders? I still think that's the case in this election, and it's up to, I'll have to see how the voters are going to turn out on this, but Willie Herenton has made this a much more interesting race.
I couldn't agree more.
Richard, I was talking to a Politico today, and I was telling him I was coming on the show, and he said when Mayor Herenton announced that he was running, that his wife, who's a senior citizen,
and they vote, by the way.
And his granddaughter, who's a millennial, both said, well, I'm glad Doc's running. That's who I'm voting for.
Oh, wow.
So look at that age gap.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's going to be interesting.
He can jump in and say, look, under my administrations in the past, we didn't have this mess going on, using his verbiage. And he can say, and he's a no-nonsense administrator, like him or not, but he can point to years where he really got some things done. Will he win in the long run? I don't know, but he sure has stirred the pot.
He's going to make it interesting, and I'll tell you what, if I look as good as he does at 83, I might run for mayor too. Let's talk about some of the other candidates, though, because I'm just interested in your perspective. There's Frank Colvett, the city councilman, who is distinguishable because he is the only known Republican in the race, the only white person in the race in a city that's predominantly African American. He's a recent entrant, and then we have the other 6 candidates who are, I mean, there's a total of 11, but these are the other, what I'm going to call legitimate candidates. There's some I'm not going to even mention their names. But so you look at the field there, and I'm just struck by the man on the upper left, Floyd Bonner, current sheriff, running for mayor, has been absolutely crickets in this whole situation with Tyre Nichols. Yet on the other hand, the guy in the bottom right, Van Turner, has been somewhat vocal. Of course, he's also head of the NAACP. He has kind of a natural reason to be talking about this and be involved. But it's just interesting how vocal or non-vocal some of these candidates are being, and I just wonder how it strikes you guys.
Yeah, anybody?
Susan?
Well, I think that Floyd Bonner has probably pretty good reason to be quiet. He's got 2 deputies that were on the scene there. He has suspended them, and we don't know what the outcome of that will be. I think he should come out and start talking, but only because he's a candidate for mayor. So, and Van Turner, as president of the NAACP, right place, right time.
Yeah.
and he's been able to leverage that position into a lot of exposure locally and nationally, and it's only inures to his benefit because he's pretty far behind in the fundraising arena. We haven't really heard anything from Paul Young about it either. A little bit, I think there was.
And he's raised the most money so
He's
far,
raised
according to the
yeah,
most
a
recent
little bit
reports.
of a clip. So and I think look, in 8 months from now, nobody's going to remember whether Floyd Bonner said something during the Tyre Nichols crisis or Van Turner was on CNN during it. That's just, we're talking about our place in time right now.
Well, I agree with that, but I think where Floyd Bonner is concerned, since he is a top law enforcement officer in this community, the aftermath of Tyre Nichols will last a lot longer with him.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And he has to be clear about police reform and about what he would do if he were the mayor, because none of what has happened with the Tyre Nichols case helps him at all.
Correct.
And so it's going to last longer with him than anybody else.
Right.
Do you think, well, I do think, then I think you would agree with me, that it's going to be interesting to see how each candidate, and I expect each candidate to be asked, when it comes to C.J. Davis, the current police chief, do you plan to retain her and keep her in that position, or are you going to hire your own person? What will be the answer there? I think will be very enlightening. And I also think that just the how much of an influence the Tyre Nichols has in the conversation as we get toward summer, July and August. I've heard from more than one political consultant like you folks who feel that this is going to simmer down like they often do, fortunately or unfortunately, and that once again, the predominant issue that's going to concern the most Memphis voters is crime, not so much policing, because we are seeing an uptick in a lot of areas, a lot more people affected by car break-ins, crimes happening where they haven't really happened before in higher numbers, and people are more on edge on this than maybe we're taking into account as we talk about Tyre Nichols over and over again. What are your thoughts on that observation?
I don't know if I agree with that. I think that you'll have some candidates that will be very vocal and will keep the Tyre Nichols conversation going because it benefits them and it benefits their candidacies. Because like a Van Turner, who's been out front, who's been talking about it a great deal, I can see him talking about the Tyre Nichols case up until the election and the role he played in trying to, support the family and educate people on what's happened and working with the DA. So I can see him keeping that conversation going. And I don't think it's going to die. I think it is going to continue throughout this campaign because I also think that the media will make sure that it stays a part of the conversation.
It is that big a story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to that point, there are some media who will definitely make sure that it stays in there because there's still a lot more to cover. The Institute for Public Service Reporting at the university, we have made this a top priority right now to stay on the story and hold people accountable and get to the bottom of what actually happened here and what does it mean? How do we fix it all?
I still don't think, and we'll see as time plays out. Notice and I have disagreed before, but at the end of the day, when it's time to go to the polls, I don't think the topic of bad policing is going to drive people to the polls. I think the topic of crime is the one thing, going to be the one big issue that takes people to the polls, and education too, even though the city administration doesn't have much to do with education.
But I think it goes hand in hand. I don't see how you separate it.
Yeah.
Crime, and Tyre was a victim of crime.
Yes, he was.
A crime by the police.
Exactly.
But Richard was referring to street crime where
Right.
people are having their cars broken into and stolen. I mean, this
Right.
is pervasive throughout the whole community.
Yeah, I agree with
So
that. But the question is going to be which candidate is best suited to deal with that. And I'm just not convinced right now that it is Floyd Bonner, even though he is the sheriff, because of what has happened with his deputies and the Tyre.
And because he's been so quiet about it, and why does the fire department, who saw the video the same day, if you believe what we're told here, as the sheriff saw his deputies there, is when the fire department saw their paramedics there, paramedics have been fired.
Right.
We don't know what's happened with the deputies, don't even know their names yet.
Well,
Exactly.
if I remember correctly, Benny Cobb was on the show with you.
He was.
And he, a former sheriff's deputy, a deputy, right?
Yeah.
He said, well, everybody knew there were a couple of deputies, sheriff's deputies out there long before they saw the video. So I think that comes into play. You may be right.
Yeah.
All right, I got to cut you off there because I got 2 minutes left for our next segment. We're going to get to it right after this.